There we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is the June 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Community Advisory Committee for the Clean Energy Alliance. If you're a member of the board, please log on and or the advisory board and join the meeting. If you're just watching from the public, you're welcome. And if you would like to make a comment at some point, reach your hand up. And with that, let's just go through our agenda. Barbara, unless there's anything you need to say preliminarily.
Our secretary needs to call roll.
Okay.
Okay, Member Kraus. Member Paul.
Yes, present.
Member DeCino.
Present.
Member Revelis.
Present.
Member Norris. I see
Present.
you there.
There we go.
Thank you. Member Shade.
Here.
Present. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. Thank you. Member Kirschbaum.
Here.
Vice Chair Mosier. And Chair Warden.
I'm here. Thank you for that. And the next item on the agenda is our pledge. Deborah, would you like to lead us in the pledge? And I don't know if we have our cool waving flag video. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to come up here in just a moment.
Okay, put your hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United
To the flag
States of America,
States of America,
and to the republic for which it
And
stands,
to the republic for which it stands,
under God, indivisible,
one nation,
with liberty and justice for all.
under God, justice.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Deborah. The next item is public comment, and this is an opportunity for anybody in the public to make a comment on an item that's not on our agenda for today. If you would like to make a comment on an item that is on the agenda, we will call on you when we get to that item. So do we have any public speakers who wanted to address us at this point?
We have no requests to speak.
All right. I'm ever hopeful that the public will start weighing in and asking us questions. But let's move right along. On our regular agenda, then item number 1 is an overview of the Brown Act as it relates to Clean Energy Alliance Community Advisory Committee members. So Barbara, I assume that's you who's going to take us through that.
It's actually our general counsel, Lindsay Thorson from Richard Watson and Gershon. Before we get started, I do want to let the Community Advisory Committee know we have 2 members that have recently resigned. One is Lee Haydu, one of our Solana Beach representatives has resigned, and as well as I just learned Alan Sweedler has resigned. So at our next board meeting, the board will declare those vacancies and we'll open up the application process and seek new members. So if you know of anyone from those cities that you think would make a good candidate, please let us know and we'll be sure to get an application out to them and hopefully encourage them to apply. So I'm going to open up my screen to share the presentation, and Ms. Thorson will be going through an update on the Brown Act for us.
All right, welcome, Lindsay. Take it away.
Hello. Thank you for having me today. As Barbara mentioned, my name is Lindsay Thorson with Richard Watson and Gershon, and today I'm going to be doing a refresher course on the Brown Act. It should be about an hour, but please jump in if you have questions. And what I've done is really tailor this to issues you may face as committee members. So you may notice there's a few areas we're not going to get into too deeply, things like closed sessions that would come up more typically for a board member in a board meeting versus a committee meeting. But if you do have any questions, again, feel free to jump in. So we have here a quote from Ralph M. Brown himself discussing the importance of having meetings open to the public. And California has a very strong focus on open and transparent government. Our Constitution itself states that the people have a right to access information concerning the conduct of the people's business. Things like the Brown Act or the Public Records Act are often called our sunshine laws, basically to make sure that everyone can see what the members of committees, of the government, of boards, of city councils are doing. And really what we want to look at is making sure that everything is transparent, and then also that the public is able to understand the process of our decision making. So next slide. So the first question that often comes up is, what does the Brown Act apply to? And what the code tells us is that it applies to legislative bodies. So the next question is, what exactly is a legislative body? So the one that comes to mind most easily is any governing body of the local agency. So there, something like a city council or a school board is sort of the most obvious and maybe sometimes most visible type of legislative body, but there's a number of other entities that also are subject to the Brown Act. And that's going to include any sort of boards or commissions created by that governing body, and also any standing committees that have a regular meeting schedule and a continuing subject matter jurisdiction. So that's where the Community Advisory Committee fits in. We meet that criteria as a legislative body, and so we have to make sure our meetings are public meetings. Okay, next slide. So the converse of that, what is not a legislative body? And that's going to be an advisory committee that's less than a quorum of the members, specifically that has a single limited purpose. It's not an ongoing committee, and typically one that once their duty is complete, then they would be dissolved. So for example, if at one of our meetings we were talking about, it'd be a really great idea to look into hiring somebody to help with an advertising campaign. Can we have two of the members go back, maybe meet, look what other entities are doing, and report back at the next meeting? And then that would be the conclusion of what that committee or that subgroup is doing. That would not be considered a legislative body. Okay, next slide. So once we determine that we are a legislative body, the next question that comes up is, so what exactly is a meeting? And the major elements of a meeting are going to be that we have a majority of the legislative body that's meeting at the same time and location, and they are there to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item that's within the subject matter of that committee or that legislative body. So one thing to note here is that there doesn't need to be a vote or a decision made in order for something to be considered a meeting. And that can be a common misconception where you may think, well, we just got together and talked about something, but we didn't actually make a decision or take a vote. That still is going to count as a meeting if we are discussing, deliberating on any item that's within the purview of this committee or the legislative body in general. So subject matter jurisdiction really means you want to make sure you're not discussing something that's within the purview of the committee. So what that means is that if you meet with two other board members or you meet with two other committee members and you discuss what happened at the baseball game the night before, that's not going to be considered a meeting. But if you're meeting with the majority of the committee members and discussing how you think you might vote on an item that's coming up or something related to what you've been tasked with, then that would be considered a meeting. So one practice tip here, especially to avoid any either appearance of something that is really a meeting, or that we don't accidentally start to talk about something related to our subject matter, is to be very mindful of any situation you're in where you do have a majority of the committee in the same place. Okay, next slide. And one of the things that can sneak up on you sometimes as far as creating a meeting is something called a serial meeting. So a serial meeting is something that can either be direct or indirect communications where you have a majority of the body and they're in the same as a regular sort of meeting that we think of, discussing, deliberating on any sort of action that's part of the potential business or business of our committee. Okay, next slide. So there's really two types of illegal meetings that we would call serial meetings that you want to be aware of. And one of them we call a hub and spoke serial meeting. And what that's going to look like is you may have a single person that's sharing ideas with a number of different people, kind of like spokes on a wheel. So if you have board member A talks to board member B and says, hey, I really, think we should vote no on the item coming up. And then board member A talks to board member C and says, hey, I just had a call with board member B. We're both in agreement that we should vote no at the next meeting. What are your thoughts? And if there's enough discussion with that one member, that can create a serial meeting, because at that point, we've shared the opinions of a majority of the committee, even though maybe technically we've never all interacted at the same time or met in person. And then the other type of serial meeting that you can have is something called a chain meeting. And that's where you would have maybe board member A talks to board member B talks to board member C, each of those cases sharing what the other board members are thinking. And at some point you have a majority of the board, a majority of a committee kind of knowing what everyone else is thinking. And that can also create a meeting for purposes of the Brown Act.
Lindsay, can you clarify? We have our community advisory committee is 11 members, and there are 2 members from each city. So is it, would it be 6 members discussing? So if there were 5 or 4, and does it matter if they're from the same city representing?
It doesn't matter if they're from the same city. So it's the number that's in the committee. So with 11 members, if you have 6 discussing, that would create a meeting. And, just again, a sort of a practice tip, if you're getting up to having 5 members of the committee talking to each other, that's something to be mindful of. And for the most part, try to avoid as well, because it's very easy at that point for someone to, then speak to another member and maybe tip us over into a majority of the committee members. Okay. And then one thing I did want to note is that a serial meeting can occur not just in person, but could also be through email, through text, through other methods. So think of more of the substance of what's happening rather than the method that it's being discussed. And so here, this slide, we just have an example of how that hub and spoke type of serial meeting might occur. There are a few things that are an exchange of information that would not be considered a serial meeting. One of those is an individual briefing from staff for a particular purpose of sharing information with the committee. And in that case, as long as the staff member is just communicating information to you, and there's not an ongoing exchange that ends up looking like this hub and spoke situation where one member of the committee's thoughts are being shared with another committee member, that is going to be okay. And even in that situation, if a particular committee member has a question that they want to refer back to staff, we're able to answer that question and have that discussion. We just can't have it that then the staff member who's talking with one committee member then is sharing that position with other board members. So we want to keep it sort of a one-way dialogue. And then when you are interacting with a member of staff, just as a committee member, it's best to not ask that staff member, oh, who else have you talked to about this? Or what is your feel on, what the other committee members are thinking, because that can also very quickly lead to sharing information with enough committee members that we would rise to the level of having a meeting. Okay. Thought we'd mix it up with a few interactive elements to the slide. So in our next slide, we're going to talk about the possibility of inadvertent serial meetings through email communication. So emails, texts, those can all be a source of accidental violations of the Brown Act, creating a meeting, because it's very easy to communicate in that method, especially if you have an email that has a lot of recipients on it. And even if you're meaning to, if you're responding on your phone, or you can easily disperse information to a large group of people. And if somebody replies all, then you've created within that a potential that we're having a meeting. So a few practice tips here is if you do receive an email that has other board members on it, never reply at all. If you want offline in some way. I know it's been practiced that when there are emails that are going out to multiple committee members or board members, any other sort of element that could be a legislative body with us, that if you send it out as a BCC, that's helpful, because then a committee member doesn't accidentally respond all or reply all to that email. So those would be the practice tips. Double check that you're not replying all to any email. And for the most part, try not to have exchanges of emails with various committee members where you're exchanging thoughts and opinions that could be related to the committee's subject matter jurisdiction. The other type of inadvertent serial meeting that can happen is through social media. And this is a really important one to be aware of, because it's relatively new. And also it has a different rule for what we define as a meeting that's something that would be subject to the Brown Act. So all the other types of meetings we've talked about have been, you have to have a majority of the committee members being part of the discussion for it to be seen as a meeting subject to the Brown Act. For social media posts, the law says 2 members of the committee are prohibited from using social media platforms to discuss any agency business. So this is actually a very limiting law that doesn't allow, even between 2 members, so even though we're not creating a majority, does not allow for those committee members to discuss the subject matter of the committee. And so what that means is we can't respond to any communication on social media that's related to our subject matter by another member. Responding to, in this context, does not just mean actually writing a comment below any sort of post, but it also is considered responding if you like that comment, if you retweet that comment, share it, or you just respond with a happy face or some other sort of emoji. That's all considered to be interacting between 2 or more members. And if that post is related to the subject matter of the committee, then it is not allowed. And so, one thing to remember here is that social media platform can cover a broad range of social media. So it includes all of the ones you might initially think of, as far as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything essentially where you have a type of platform that's open and accessible to the public. So if you have your own blog, anything like that, where people are able to comment and respond, that would also fit into that. It's what it does to be in public and not not a type of social media platform that's restricted. So for social media platforms like Nextdoor, where technically you do have to show that you're part of a residential area in order to comment, there's a question, would something like that be considered social media platform under this? And there's nothing definitive at this point on that, but I think it's best in those situations to be safe and avoid entering into any back and forth with one of the other members on something within our subject matter jurisdiction. Next slide. So it is good to note, though, that there are certain ways that you can use social media. One of them is, of course, you can answer any questions from the public. So you are free to interact with the public, provide information to the public, or solicit information from the public if you want to get their viewpoint on an issue, even if it's within our subject matter jurisdiction. We just have to be careful that we of the other members then responding to one of your posts related to that. The other thing that we are allowed to do is have a personal interaction or discuss on social media any private matters. So if you have a fellow committee member that you want to wish happy birthday to on Facebook, you are able to do that. But the only thing you want to keep in mind is just to be careful that any private or personal posts would not, in some ways be seen as related to the subject matter of the committee. So for example, if you post something about attending a seminar on solar panel installation for residents in your neighborhood, then you might want to be careful if you're another committee member commenting or making any sort of indication that you are agreeing, disagreeing with what happened, because then we could get into that sort of gray area where maybe that's seen as sharing an opinion regarding something within our purview. So, when in doubt, I think it's better to not interact with another member if you're questioning whether that might fit into under the umbrella of this law relating to social media posts. And lastly on this, I would just note that this does not apply to email or texting. So even though those are other forms of technology to discuss, this only relates to specifically public social media platforms. Okay. So now that we've kind of gone through all the ways that we can create a meeting, I wanted to highlight some of the ways that we can know when something is not a meeting. So here we have individual contacts, and that's something we've kind of discussed in a few exceptions previously. You're allowed to interact one-on-one as long as we don't end up creating a chain of contacts that leads to a majority. We're allowed to attend conferences, and it's an item that's of general interest to the public or to our agency. And we do, in that situation, just have to avoid a majority of the committee discussing anything within our subject matter jurisdiction. And similarly, if we attend another CEA meeting, so for example, attend a board meeting, if we go to any social or ceremonial event, or you want to sit in the audience of one of the other committees, those are all allowable. And again, you just want to make sure that if there are a majority of the members there, that after the meeting or at any other point, we're not kind of gathering and discussing what happened at the meeting if it's related to our subject matter jurisdiction. Okay, next slide. So there's a few different types of meetings. One of them is a regular meeting of the committee. And what that's going to look like is meetings that happen at the day, time, and location that was determined for the year by resolution. For those types of meetings, we want to make sure our agenda is posted 72 hours in advance, and want to make sure that the agenda includes a general description of what's going to be discussed at that meeting. And it does not have to be an elaborate description. It just has to give the public the ability to know essentially whether they would like to attend that meeting or not, and if they're interested in what the discussion is going to be. So for example, with that, if we just had on the agenda, approve agreement, that's something that's not going to give the public enough information to know, who is it with, what is it about? So they wouldn't be able to know if that's something that they're interested in, versus if we have something as simple as, approve agreement with John Smith for IT support. That doesn't give a ton of detail, but it gives the basics of what's going to be discussed and would let the member of the public know, okay, this is something I would like to look into further and attend the meeting. Okay, next slide. The other type of meeting that we can have is a special meeting. And for a special meeting, that's one that's not being held at the typical time that we would have for our regularly scheduled meetings. And for that type of meeting, we just have to provide notice 24 hours in advance of holding that meeting. Make sure that every member of the committee is aware of that meeting. And if there's any press that have wanted to be notified, perform that. At the special meeting, whereas typically in a regular meeting at the beginning, as we saw today, we give time for the public to provide any comment on something that's not on the agenda. At a special meeting, the focus is just going to be on what the items are on the agenda, and the public can speak to those items. Okay, next slide. The other type of meeting that can occur, which is really an extension of an existing meeting, is to have an adjourned meeting. And this is going to be fairly unusual, I would say, especially for our committee meetings. But this is a regular meeting. The meeting, rather than being concluded, is adjourned to continue at a later time and place. And that can be done for a couple of different reasons. Sometimes if a meeting is going extremely late and, continuing it the next day might be in the best interest of everybody. If we do adjourn a meeting, we need to post notice at the location of the meeting within 24 hours of the adjournment. And if the meeting is going to be 5 days later than the date of the original meeting, then we would have to repost the agenda as to what is going to be covered. But again, I think this will be unlikely for our committee meetings. Okay, next slide. So then going back a little bit to look at what we're going to want to make sure are in our agendas that are available to the public. For the most part, again, we want to make sure that the agenda gives the public notice of what's going to be discussed so that they can make a determination if they're interested in the topic of that meeting. So we need to make sure that that agenda is accessible, distributed in advance. If there's someone who's requesting copies, that we have that posted on the agency's website. And if there is going to be somebody teleconferencing into the meeting, then on the agenda, we would need to designate that location as well. And you'll see we have a little asterisk there because right now we're in a different situation given the COVID guidelines, which we will discuss a little bit later. But if there is a time in the future where these are no longer in place and we go back to in-person, kind of more our regular course of action meetings, then we'd want to make sure that if there is someone that's teleconferencing into the meeting, their location is noted on the agenda, and that also the place that they are teleconferencing in from is accessible to the public as well. Okay. And then as far as agendas go, and say there's something that is part of the documents that are supportive of the agenda, but it's not included in the initial agenda packet. If we have something that is made available to the committee members before the meeting, then we should have copies of that available at the meeting. If there's something that is presented at the meeting, then we just want to make sure that that is available to the public as soon as possible after the meeting. Okay. So for items that are not on a posted agenda, the basic rule is that no discussion or action on an item that's not within the posted agenda. So that's an absolute rule for special meetings. There's not any exception to that. For a regular meeting, there are a few times when there are exceptions to that. And on the next slide, I think we have a few examples of that. So the types of items that you could discuss at a meeting, even if they're not on the agenda, one of them would be if we have just a brief response to a public comment. So for example—
Excuse me for a minute. Lindsay, did you want to take questions as you go along? I see Deborah has her hand up.
Sure, yes, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. I didn't want you to get too far from this. I just had a clarity question on the live presentations. So if the live presentation, so it's the first time the board has seen it or any board has seen it, that live presentation does need to be posted somewhere later for public to access it? Is that what you're saying, or can it reside in the recording?
So for example, today we're providing a PowerPoint presentation that includes the slides that we're showing today. So these would be something that would be available for the public to look at in the form of an attachment, either accessed, and this time accessed online likely. If somebody just at a meeting gives an oral presentation and they do not pass out handouts to the board or to a committee, then there's nothing that needs to be further documented for that. Okay. So yes, what can be discussed at a meeting if it's not on the agenda? And one of those would be a brief response to public comments. So for example, if in the initial comments of the public, where they can ask about anything, if a member of the public gets up and says, you know, I just don't even know where to find agendas for your committee meetings. I don't know where they're supposed to be. If a board member or a committee member in response to that said, well, you know, if you go to our website and you click on this link, all the agendas will populate there. Something in a response to that, you know, that topic is not on the agenda for that day, but it's a very quick response to something that can be answered in that manner. What we don't want to do is get into any sort of lengthy discussion about a topic that's within our subject matter jurisdiction if it's not something that was on the agenda. We can also ask a clarifying question if there's a topic on the agenda that then sort of segues into a different question. If we want to refer to staff and say, can you bring back more information on that next time? If we want to request a future report or ask that that item be placed on the next agenda, those are all things that we can bring up at the meeting, even if that specific question was not on the agenda. One of the other things we can do, and we'll often have on an agenda, something like an update or report where each of the committee members might just note what they've done in the community the previous month or anything related to their actions. That would also be something that could be discussed at the meeting, even though individual members' specific activities are not things that are listed on the agenda. Okay. So what we are doing right now, we're having our teleconference over Zoom, is allowed because we have AB 361 that went into effect, essentially moving forward what had been allowed under the executive order in response to the COVID pandemic and the need to not be meeting in person for a period of time. So what this legislation allows us to do for now is to meet remotely while the governor has a declared emergency in the state, and allows us to suspend the general Brown Act teleconferencing requirements, specifically that we do not have to list all of the addresses where people are remotely teleconferencing in from. And we also do not have to make those remote locations available to the public. Under the Brown Act generally, I think as I'd mentioned previously, you would have to make sure the public could access wherever the remote person was teleconferencing from, which in some circumstances creates unusual circumstances. I know in the past I had a board member who was on a cruise and wanted to teleconference into a board meeting. And so what they did was they went down to the lobby on the cruise ship and they posted the agenda for the board meeting, and anyone else who was there who wanted to join would be able to. So that was, what we had to do under the Brown Act as written. And so this AB 361, at least through January 2024, allows us to meet through teleconferencing through Zoom as we are today, as long as certain requirements are met. And we have some of those on the next slide. So within the state of emergency, we have to have imposed or recommended measures of social distancing. And the legislative body here, the board has done this, has determined that meeting in person still presents an imminent risk to the health and safety of attendees. And once we hold these meetings, we have to allow time for public comment in real time and provide the ability for the public to join on the Zoom call and interact through an internet-based method. If there is any internet outage or disruption during a meeting, then the committee or whatever the legislative body is would not be able to take any action during that time. And also the legislative body, and here the board has done this and it covers our committees as well, is continue to make periodic findings every 30 days where we reconsider that the circumstances are still in place that allow us to meet under AB 361. There were a couple of bills out there that were trying to make this a more permanent solution, not requiring that we had a state of emergency in place. And kind of the last one that would allow for a general teleconferencing with limited requirements as to when that could happen recently was amended to require, even in those circumstances, a quorum of the committee would still have to be in the physical location. So at least for now, it doesn't look like we will have a legislation that simply allows for completely teleconferenced meetings under these similar conditions, but we will keep you updated if anything changes to that effect. Okay, next slide. So we're getting toward the end of our presentation, but I did want to talk a little bit about public participation at a meeting. And the key thing to remember here is essentially that the public has the right to speak on, at a regular meeting, any item within the subject matter of the committee. So they can, even if it's not something on the agenda, in the initial public comment, can speak to whatever they would like to. And secondly, to any business that's on the agenda, they may also speak to that at a meeting. And one thing to note here is that even if they are speaking in a way that's criticizing the choices of the committee or expressing dislike for something that the organization or the committee has done, we still, as part of the legislative body, have to listen and allow that discussion. And we can't stop somebody from speaking simply because they are disagreeing with something that the committee or any of the legislative bodies have done. Okay, next slide. One of the things we can do, though, is set up reasonable regulations for public comment. And so that can include setting time limits, as you may have seen, where we have limited speakers to 3 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on the organization. You can also request that they fill out speaker cards to make time more efficient as far as any public comments. We can establish some rules of decorum. So, on the one hand, if somebody, again, is being critical of the committee or something like that, we can't prevent them from speaking. However, if they're acting in such a way, and this is going to be fact specific to the situation, that they are completely disrupting the meeting, then there are circumstances there where we could have someone ask someone to stop speaking or have them leave the committee. And we also do have to allow someone to record the meeting if they would like to do that. Okay. So lastly, what happens after we've gone through all of these requirements if we are not following one of them? And essentially, there's two different enforcement methods, civil and criminal. Criminal I'll talk to briefly because I think that's very unusual and unlikely. And that would only be brought if there was a situation where there was action taken at a meeting in violation of the Brown Act, and the members had an intent to deprive the public of information. So that would have to be sort of a concerted effort of at least an individual who was deliberately trying to keep information from the public. And to show that can be quite difficult. And this is going to be a rare situation. Civil action is going to be a more common situation, and that can either come from a member of the public or the district attorney. In those situations, if we did, in their eyes, violate the Brown Act in some way, we will typically receive a notice, have an opportunity to hear what the perceived violation is if we feel that there was one, and a commitment to not do that again in the future. And that would be something that we would approve at a public meeting, not on the consent calendar. So it would be something that would be its own item. And as long as we do that and we've cured or agree to in the future not violate the Brown Act in that way, then that situation resolves itself. If we do not take action, then there could be a lawsuit or further claims from an individual to try and get a court in that case to make us comply with what they perceive as something that we've done that violates the Brown Act. And in that case, we could be subject to attorney's fees and costs if that turns out to be the case. So with that, any additional questions or comments that anybody?
Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was very thorough and actually quite understandable. Let's see if we have some questions from committee members. If you do, shoot your hand up. I'm not seeing any at the moment, so let me prime the pump with a couple of common scenarios, Lindsay, for your comment. Number one is we're having a meeting and people leave and all of a sudden we've lost a quorum. What does the Brown Act require us to do in that circumstance?
If you did lose the quorum, then at that point, you wouldn't be able to further vote. And I would at that time conclude that meeting for the day. And then those items could be added to a next agenda or meeting to conclude.
Would it be appropriate for the less than a quorum people remaining to continue discussing the topic or not?
If you have less than a quorum, you could continue to discuss because technically at that point you would not have a meeting. But I think just in order to keep the appearance of the meeting, because at that point it's going to appear to be a meeting, and to not have any desire to make any decisions or further discuss, my recommendation would be that we conclude the meeting at that point, and you can end the meeting without a quorum present and take up any action at a future meeting.
All right, thanks for that. The second scenario is, and we have on our agenda later today to talk about setting up subcommittees. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a subcommittee that's less than a quorum is not subject to the Brown Act. But if we added an outsider, it would be. So for example, if we said, let's have a subcommittee to work on community solar, and wouldn't it be great? Let's invite somebody from the Chamber of Commerce to sit on the committee with us.
Yes. So if you're creating a subcommittee where you have members of the public and it's going to be an ongoing discussion, then you would have that be subject to the Brown Act. That's correct.
That's what I've always thought. And you could certainly invite that representative of the Chamber of Commerce to come and participate. But if you make them a member of the committee, you've created an unnecessary issue. Deborah, your hand is up.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. The first one had to do with the speakers. You know, I know right now we don't have very many controversial topics here, but they're happening everywhere else. So, you know, just depends on what's on the agenda. The speaker card, the whole process needs to be very clearly defined. And my question to you is what's happening in a lot of jurisdictions, they'll accept a speaker card for an agenda item and this speaker notes if they're pro or con, so that if they're doing a lottery selection to allow a fair representation at the mic. And I know that that's not happening everywhere. Do you have any comments on that as it relates to Brown Act? In other words, you get the cards, you know who's stacking on either side of the issue, and then you randomly select, let's say you have 100 speakers and you can only hear 10, and you're randomly selecting. Is that a violation of the rights of people who were first come, first serve, you know, walked in the building and got on the list?
Well, there's no guarantee as far as the first come, first serve. And especially if you have a controversial topic where maybe, you know, you have 100 people who want to speak on an issue. The Brown Act does let you create reasonable timeframes and limitations on what the speakers, you know, how long a speaker can talk or how many speakers there will be. You could also limit the amount of time that public comment is going to be allowed for. So we might say, you know, public comment is only going to be for a maximum of 1 hour and each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. And as far as how you would select, I think I would not go by what someone's position is, because you could have a situation where if it is a controversial topic and 90% of the people that are there are against it and 10% are for it, but you're having it be a 50-50 as to what people's views are, that would not necessarily, even for the committee or for a board or whoever is hearing that and wanting to get the input of the public, might not give you know, as accurate of a representation as could be. So I would want any restrictions to be in a more kind of content neutral way, but you could definitely limit it in order to get the most number of speakers. What I've also seen done is if there are a huge number of speakers and there's sort of two sides to an issue, you can say, you know, for those of you that are opposed to this issue, if you want to discuss amongst yourselves and have, you know, 10, 15, whatever amount of people kind of represent your comments, you know, something to that effect too. So they may then among themselves decide we're going to have our sort of 10 most dynamic speakers get up rather than, you know, have it be just whoever sort of submitted a card first. So there are a number of ways to limit or make public comment more efficient, but we do want to make sure we're not kind of picking and choosing based on the content. And I think if you do have a controversial issue where we know we're going to have a great number of comments coming in, or there will be a lot of people in attendance that will want to speak, I think it is helpful to, you know, prior to that meeting on the agenda, you can even note, you know, at this meeting, speakers will have X amount of time so that we can set expectations for people.
Okay, and then my second part of that has to do with, you know, I know we probably will not be doing closed session items, but I think our board probably will, you know, in terms of evaluating contracts, performance, things like that. Who is responsible for the oversight of closed session breach? So is that still under the Brown Act if a closed session legislative body meets, but information is leaking out from that? That's not a report out, it's just discussed in that.
So if you have somebody who is in the closed session and they are then discussing that information outside of the closed session.
Yes, and it's not a report out, so it's not a decision or, yeah.
Mhm. So that in part would be, it could be an internal discussion among the board or the agency as far as a reprimand to a particular member who is doing that, or somebody could submit a complaint or member of the public noting that closed session items are being discussed outside of closed session, which is in violation of the Brown Act. So it could come from either of those.
Okay, I think that's it. Although I'm just always wondering about the structure. So we have 2 board members representing, their city council board, right? Or 1, and they're reporting back and information is flowing. You're just talking about Brown Act as we manage our community member meetings and our board meetings, right? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Rick, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question and a comment.
Okay.
So when we talk about people being able to speak off the agenda about anything, I guess I always looked at that as though they really could speak about anything. But you're saying that it has to be a topic that we would cover. So somebody couldn't get up and use their 3 minutes just to read a poem or something, right?
Well, I think you've touched on a good point here, because what the Brown Act says is during that initial original kind of public comment at the beginning of the meeting, a person has an ability or a right to speak on anything within the subject matter jurisdiction of that body that they're speaking in front of. So yes, technically, if somebody came up and said, I would just like to read a poem during my 3 minutes, could they make some argument that that's connected to our subject matter jurisdiction? I think you can kind of tie almost anything to somehow being connected to it. And as long as they are not creating, any sort of issue that's actually disrupting the meeting or anything else, then I would typically err on the side of allowing someone in that initial public comment to speak on basically whatever it is that they would want to say. They're going to be limited to the 3 minutes, and after that they've said their piece, because I think it's better to be a little more open and have the members of the public be able to say what they want if they think it's somehow related to your subject matter, than to have someone feel or have the community feel that we're telling the public they cannot comment at our meetings.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. And then the other thing I just wanted to comment about the format of this meeting, the virtual meetings and the Brown Act being temporarily waived. I guess I'm concerned that we don't have a regular meeting place, and that the exception can be seen as just as a way of getting around having a meeting in person, where otherwise we would be having a meeting in person. And I just have that concern I want to express. Thank you.
I think, Rick, you raised a good question, and Barbara can comment, but at the board level of the CEA, we've decided when we're able to go to in-person meetings, we're going to meet in San Marcos. I don't think we've directly discussed whether that means this committee too would meet there, but maybe. But basically, we follow the lead of our board as to when we go to public in-person meetings and where they would be. Lindsay, did you want to jump in on that? Or Barbara, or both?
Sure. So as far as the location, yes, if the location, if we were meeting in person, would be San Marcos, then that will be the location going forward once we move back to in person. And then as far as holding meetings virtually at this time, really what AB 361 suspended was that requirement that all of us don't have to list exactly where we're located and let the public come to our houses or businesses or wherever it is that we are calling in from. But other than that, all of these meetings still otherwise comply with all of the Brown Act notices and ability for the public to interact with the committee.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Or Barbara, did you want to comment on that?
I will. So our location for in-person meetings would be San Marcos, or because we're getting that set up to host our meetings both for the board and the Community Advisory Committee.
Thank you for that. And that will be nice. And we're all looking forward to that. COVID continues to evolve. And the good news for this group is the decisions about when we start meeting in public, those are all made at our board level. So we don't have to make those. We follow the lead that they set. And for us, Lindsay has covered very nicely the aspects of the Brown Act. The key ones for us, I think, are how we communicate with each other, that reply all, and making sure that if we're setting up subcommittees and dealing with each other, it's at less than a quorum basis. Anything else on this topic before we move on? We do have some other subjects to cover. Thank you again, Lindsay. That was very enlightening. And thank you, board members, for a good question. And Barbara, let's take it back to you. The next looks like the budget.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. It was nice to see everybody's faces. All right, I will say goodbye. Have a good rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Chair Warden. Our next item on the agenda is to review the proposed budget, and it's very similar to what we went over in depth at our last meeting, but I did want to just circle back and share with you what was shared with the board. And I am going to have to start and stop here just real quick to make sure the slides will advance. So the first step in our budget process was to take a look at our current year budget and look at how are we tracking with regards to our budget, and how will our revenues and expenditures, how are we looking in terms of how they're lining up against the budget. And our revenues are coming in, right in line with what our expectations are with regards to the revenue. And I should say, for the purposes of the public, our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. So our fiscal year is ending here at the end of this month. In terms of expenditures, we actually are anticipating to have a savings of just over $1.2 million on the expenditure side. And so we will have net results of operations of $1.2 million to the good, more reserves than what we had anticipated. The savings is generally coming from power supply costs. So we budget based on what's called forward price curves, or projections of what energy costs will be. The majority of our power supply, we have contracts that give us price cost certainty, but there is a small portion of our needs that are not locked into contracts, just to ensure we have a cushion in case we have less demand for our energy or less sales than what had anticipated. And so when we actually are settling our monthly costs with what was actually sold to customers, we have about $1 million in savings there. We also have savings in our legal services line item and general professional services. So in developing our proposed budget, we had used the following assumptions. One is our revenues are based on our current adopted rates. So this budget does not anticipate any rate change, either an increase in rates or a decrease in our rates that we charge customers. The power supply costs are both based on our actual executed contracts for electricity that will be delivered during the next fiscal year. And then we used the May forward price curve of energy for that portion of our energy supply that we'll be buying that is not covered under our existing contracts. The consulting services are based on the contracts as approved by the board. And then it takes into account the priorities and goals, including financial stability. So we are still a new entity. We want to continue to build our reserves and be fiscally conservative, and we take our job of stewards of the revenues of our customers very seriously in managing our budget. We want to make sure we're meeting all of our regulatory compliance obligations. And then last but certainly not least is working towards a successful launch and expansion into the cities of Escondido and San Marcos. And so you'll see that increases in our budget are reflective of that expansion. So the big picture, we look at how do our revenues projected for next fiscal year stack up against revenues and expenses of the current fiscal year. And we are projecting revenues that exceed this year's revenues of about $17.5 million. And that's not due to increasing our rates. It's really due to the expansion and the sales anticipated to the new customers in Escondido and San Marcos. And right in alignment with that, our expenditures will be about $18.5 million higher than this year. The majority of that is power supply costs. So it's a combination of the increased energy that we're going to need to buy to serve Escondido and San Marcos, but also the energy market has been increasing, not unlike gas prices you see at the pump. As gas prices go up, so does the cost of electricity to buy electricity. Fortunately, most of our energy needs are locked into contracts, and we entered into those contracts before the climbing prices, but we do have some exposure there. So while we had a net results of operations in the current fiscal year of 3.5 million, and remember $1 million of that was due to savings in power supply, this budget, the proposed budget that went before the board, has net results of operations of 2.4 million. As we discussed at our last Community Advisory Committee meeting, there are positions being considered. One new one that I wasn't aware of prior to meeting with our Community Advisory Committee is our current interim Chief Financial Officer, Marie Bercuti, who has been the interim Chief Financial Officer from the beginning. She has notified us that her personal life has gotten to the point where she's no longer able to provide those services after the end of August. And so that position has been inserted in the budget as a transition from interim. Although in speaking with the board for these two positions, because they're really not currently full-time hours, we will be looking at alternatives to hiring in order to reduce our budget and fill those needs through other interim opportunities. The three new proposed positions the board was in favor of, and so will be included in the final budget that is before the board for adoption on June 30th, which included key accounts and programs manager. And that position will be mainly responsible for developing relations with our key account groups, meeting with, for example, the school districts. We want to ensure we are on top of goals and priorities and needs of the school districts, our large water districts, and then key accounts within the community. Also responsible for managing the enrollment into Escondido and San Marcos, the communications and outreach efforts related to those activities, and then start developing our programs. And while we don't have much in the way of our own reserve funds to fund programs, there's grant money out there that we can be applying for and seeking out, and that position will be tasked with working on that. We have proposed a regulatory and legislative affairs analyst or manager, and that position would be responsible for assisting with tracking regulatory and legislative activity, our intergovernmental relationships with our local elected officials in the community, working with our cities when there are bills or regulatory activity that we want assistance with taking positions. And then procurement and contracts administrator, which will manage our solicitations and ensure that our contracts are being have appropriate language, tracking insurance, and also establishing our supplier diversity program that starting in 2023, we will be responsible for reporting to the PUC on. And Chair Warden, I think we have a question.
Yes, we do. I was going to say, Paige, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I have sorry, I didn't ask on the earlier slide, but first of all, Barbara, are we planning on raising rates for 2022-23 budget year?
There's no assumption for raising rates
Okay.
for the coming fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. And I was curious because SDG&E rates are going up all the time. Are our contract costs pretty much in parallel to what SDG&E is seeing?
We don't have visibility to see what their contract costs are. But what I will say is that they are transacting in the same market as we are. So I would anticipate, to the extent, so it will all depend on when did they enter into their contracts and when do those contracts expire and that sort of thing. But they're impacted by the same market conditions that we're being impacted, to the extent that they have open positions that now they have to buy at this higher rate.
So right now, we're at about a 2% discount from SDG&E, and that is going through our 2022-23 fiscal year. Is that correct? And
assuming if SDG&E doesn't change their rates and we don't change our rates, then the discount would continue.
And I think I read recently that they're looking at almost an 8% increase in their electricity rates, but that's not until 2024. Does that sound right?
They have a number of different rate cases that they've filed. One is their general rate case, which is an every 3-year process. I think that one is the rate case that would go into effect in 2024. I feel like it was a higher percentage than 8%, but I think it's over the course of the 3 years, not all in 1 year necessarily.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, Paige, the takeaway that I take from this is the numbers Barbara is using in the budget are very conservative because they assume no increase in our rates. We know SDG&E's rates are likely to go up. Our target is to maintain that discount below their rates. And one of the key moving pieces are our rates to achieve our goals. So are we going to raise rates? Nobody knows for sure at this point. Is it likely? It's definitely in the scenario. Wouldn't you say, Barbara, that we could end up doing that?
If the market continues to climb the way it is, it may be possible that we find ourselves, needing to raise our rates. We certainly don't want to do that, and which is why we don't make an assumption of increasing rates. And in fact, as we walk through this, you'll see that we fall short of meeting our 5% reserve contribution. And so what we're doing is relooking at our budget, including, for example, these 2 positions, keeping them as part-time interim as opposed to full-time to reduce our costs. So we're really going to look at how can we work with reducing our expenditures to get us to the 5% reserve contribution.
Paige, did you have something else, or is your hand just still up? Okay, go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, so with those positions, this is what our organization chart looks like. So we have the positions that report to the board of directors are the general counsel, our chief financial officer, the board secretary, and then the chief executive officer. So those positions report to the board of directors. And then the new positions would report to the chief executive officer. This is the line item budget, and it's the same as what we had reviewed at our last meeting. So we started the year with a negative fund balance, which is normal for a brand new CCA, because we start incurring costs prior to even selling 1 kilowatt hour of electricity to customers. And so our first fiscal year, we were incurring our startup costs, our initial energy procurements, and only had a couple of months of sales because we launched over the course months of May and June. We do then, after this year, assuming that these assumptions are correct, our $3.5 million results brings us to a positive fund balance or ending fund balance. And then adding in then the 2.4 million generated from the proposed budget gets us to 3.25 million. And that is short of our 5% target. And so we'll be refining these numbers here in the expenditure with the goal of bringing to the board for adoption in June, a budget that does result in meeting our 5% reserve goal. And that concludes my presentation on the budget. And Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Barbara. Deborah?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions about the CFO and also your proposed budget for staffing, which tripled, looked like a triple, went from 209, almost $1 million. Isn't the organization becoming large enough that it would need a full CFO? Are you looking at a fractional CFO type situation for the financial management?
We contracted with a firm to handle the day-to-day accounting services. They came on board starting in January. So they provide all of our accounts payable, like billing, accounts receivable, assist with processing invoices. And so right now with Marie, she spends maybe 10 hours or so a week on Clean Energy Alliance activities. Majority is cash management, approving invoices, but there really isn't at this point enough workload for 40 hours per week at this point.
Well, I know we have a fractional CFO we just hired for another nonprofit that I'm on, and it's working. So I just was wondering if that was a consideration. So can you just, in general terms, explain that position-wise, how you got to the $1 million for staffing and consultants? What is the bulk of that? Is it the new hires, or do you see there's going to be more consulting needs moving forward as well for the next year, bringing on the new cities?
It was to provide funding for salaries and benefits for assuming those 5 positions would become full-time. So the CFO, the board secretary, a programs analyst, manager, regulatory analyst, and the key accounts program and procurement. It's ballpark just based on pulling salaries, looking up online, job descriptions, but those would be refined based on actually having a HR company do a real salary survey, develop our job descriptions. But to be conservative, we use that figure. And so we'll be able to whittle that down because the board's supportive of, not bringing those 2 positions in full time at this point. And we also know that we won't be ready on July 1 to hire them, so we can reduce the costs to reflect a partial year for the coming year. And then we'll be relooking at our professional services line item as well, and legal services, since we're ending this year with a savings. We'll go back and see if, because we have savings, will the time being spent by attorneys be similar for the coming year, that we can pull those savings out at the beginning instead of the end.
Okay, and then one last question. I know the fiscal year for this organization is July 1. I know school districts are July 1, so I just want to, is that a municipality issue, or why are we on that calendar?
Yeah, it's
lines with, SDG. I'm just trying to get sort of some clarity on that.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know that it's a legal requirement, but it certainly is the, I don't know that any municipalities or special districts that have a fiscal year that operates different than July 1st to June 30th.
It's driven by the state. Law requires the state budget to be adopted by a certain date, so we back up all the local government agencies. to queue up with that. That's why, but it's weird. Most people think in a calendar year and we don't, which is odd. I wanted to comment before we leave this topic too, that one of the things the board discussed and reported on was an evaluation of Ms. Boswell as our chief executive officer. And she's way too modest to tell you, but the reports were glowing. She's done a fantastic job and they're treating her nicely in compensation and giving her a modest bonus as a thank you. And I join in that. She's really terrific. Any other questions about the budget? I do want us to get to the newsletter and hopefully subcommittees before we leave so that we can do some work between now and the next meeting. But I don't want to cut anybody off if there's somebody that has a budget question. All right, there's a hand. Jennifer.
Sorry, I just have a really quick one. So Barbara, you said that you don't anticipate hiring those people July 1st. Is there a time frame for when the new hires will come in?
My goal would be that we be able to be out recruiting and to hire by October 1st. Part of it is laying the groundwork and making sure that we have our appropriate personnel policies in place, being led by our general counsel to help us lay the groundwork and foundation to be an entity hiring staff, bringing in permanent staff, which at this point we don't have. So depending on how much time that takes, but I would like to have at least the key accounts program manager on board by October 1st to help with the customer outreach related to Escondido and San Marcos launches.
Yeah, I think the board's feeling was, and correct me if I got it wrong, Barbara, these are essential positions to gear up to service San Marcos and Escondido. We've also been dating, and perhaps you could say we're engaged, but we're not married yet to Vista, Oceanside, and San Clemente, but that's likely to happen. And when it does, that will like double our size again. So it's lurking ahead of us, a reevaluation of, do we at some point need a physical office building, and how do we transition from consultants to permanent staff? But right now we're just kind of holding the phone on that, I think. Right, Barbara?
That's an accurate.
All right, then any more budget questions? If not, let's move on to the newsletter and then get to the subcommittees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At our last meeting, the committee expressed an interest in developing a community newsletter. And so this item is really to gather information from the committee and get your thoughts with regards to that community newsletter. So I've posed a few questions here, and I'm going to see, it's not going to, I can't edit, but I'll take notes. But some questions here for discussion include, so what is the thought of, am I on the right item?
You're on subcommittees.
There we go.
There we go.
What's the goal of the newsletter? So what are we trying to communicate? What types of articles or topics do you want to see? Are there recurring topics that you want to see in the newsletter? Just get your ideas with regards to that. How frequently should we be putting it out? And what sections or what topic areas do we want to see? So I really kind of pick your brains and get your thoughts with regards to the newsletter.
All right.
And we don't need to keep this up. I'm going to take it off so we can see each other a little better. Yep.
Okay, let's hear what Deborah thinks, and then Paige.
Well, I guess my first question is, who is our audience? I mean, it seems like it's a community, but is it the whole community? Is it the people that have already signed up? I mean, who is it going to? Everybody in the general community? I mean, the reason why I'm asking is because if I'm a member and I'm receiving the benefit, I would like to kind of know how we're doing. I would like those kind of details. But if I'm still recruiting community, I might want to front face it a different way. In other words, if I'm involved, I probably want to see, but I want to have a link to budget updates and things like that kind of tell me how solid, the alliance is, more details about the growth. But if I'm in the greater community, you're still recruiting them to come on board. So that type of communication might be a little bit different. So I don't have the answer to that. I'm just throwing that out as a question.
Good point. Paige?
I know a lot of this is in your marketing materials anyway, but things like why not to opt out CEA, the benefits, because I know at the time that Carlsbad joined up, there was a lot of chatter on like Nextdoor about they didn't like being put into something, they didn't. So some people just opted out for the sake of opting out. But and then this is because I have solar personally, but I don't think a lot of rooftop solar owners know that they can opt to 100% clean energy for any extra energy that they need. And I think that's a pool of customers that are probably more amenable to going to 100%. They may just not know about that option. So that's just, anyway, a couple of.
Other comments anybody wants to make? Just shoot your hand up. Jennifer. I'm sorry, Jennifer, you're still muted.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Got it. I really agree with what Deborah was saying about the audience. I think it's really hard to narrow down like what we're going to focus on until we decide who the audience is, because the people that don't even have CCA in their community, a lot of people don't even know what it is. I mean, it's sort of people that I've talked to here in San Marcos, nobody has any idea what a CCA is. So it's kind of like you have that audience where you're just educating them and kind of bringing examples of other CCAs in California. And then like Deborah was saying, people that already have signed up, what are they getting for, their membership? So I don't know. I mean, can we answer that as a board, as a group? Like, who do we want to write this newsletter for?
We can express our opinion on it. If you're a city that has joined the CEA, then everybody who's getting power is one of our customers, basically. And the choice for them is either to opt out, in which case then they're not our customer, which generally runs 7 to 10% of the people, or they're making a choice of which of our power options they want to choose. And I think that's our target audience, all of those people. And ideally, we would get to the point where people would view the CEA as their trusted source for energy information to make decisions, because there are lots of people that are reluctant to just rely on what SDG&E tells them and are confused and uninformed. So that's my thoughts. Let's see, Deborah, back to you, and then Paige again.
Yeah, okay. I think, Dwight, what you just said kind of frames exactly where I'm kind of coming from. In other words, if I am in and I am opting in and I'm receiving the energy through the Alliance, I want to have, updated news. I want to know what's going on. I want to know how this is changing and meeting my city's climate action goals. That's the kind of stuff I want to know, right? But if I am not, and I'm not in, I'm back to education. Here's the benefits of being part of it. So my question back to you is there a way to have two versions? So we have a member community, one, and then we also have one that goes out almost like a recruitment. We're doing so well. You're not a member yet, but boy, would we like to still have you in. You can help us meet our target goals. And I think that's pretty easy to do. Send the two versions because you have the mail serve. But I mean, that's kind of where I'm seeing it, because it does meet, if we're going to do it right, it should meet the needs of our community. And those that are already in, you're preaching to the choir, unless you're giving them that additional information about, how their efforts are making those larger climate action goals, come about.
Good point. My own take, and then I'll get to you, Paige, is our main target audience are the 90 to 92% who aren't going to opt out. And there's lots and lots of information to convey to them as we go along about their energy needs and their energy options and the programs we're going to develop and how they can participate. That 8 to 10% who might opt out, it would certainly make sense to me to shoot a newsletter out before they make that decision that focuses on why they shouldn't opt out. But once they've chosen to opt out, I'm not sure that we should spend a whole lot of time trying to reel them back in, because we're basically trying to get them to change their mind. And they're going to be a minority of the people that we're trying to serve anyway, but that's just my thinking. So Barbara, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to put out a couple of thoughts. One is to think about is how are we going to distribute the newsletter for the new customers in Escondido and San Marcos. We actually don't have any email or that type of information for them because they're not our customers. So SDG&E can't provide that to us. We do receive it for our existing customers, and we can certainly send out a newsletter, via email. But I'm wondering if, some of these topics that have been thrown out, the very specific ones, what are the benefits of being a CEA customer? Information about rooftop solar. We do put out social media every week. And so, one of the challenges that we've had is getting people to follow us on Twitter, to, follow us on Facebook or, on YouTube. And I would love to get some ideas of how can we grow that engagement. We have a Facebook page, and we can certainly highlight some of these topics, which are very good. How are we doing as an entity? I think committee member Shade is a great comment that, we want to get the word out, how we're doing, are we achieving our goals? We're going to be putting out our power content label, which is our report card on, what was our renewable energy content for last year, what types of sources did it come from? And they will get mailed to every customer by October 1st. But in the meantime, we do have some information on that we can share. So, what would be, if we were to email out a newsletter, do we think people will read it? Will they think we're spamming them? What are your, in your kind of day-to-day, working lives, what is an effective communication tool that we can really, think that we're really going to have people take a moment to read it? I'm just very interested to hear your thoughts with regards to that.
Good question, Barbara. Susan, let's hear what you think, and then we'll come to back to Paige and Deborah.
I think, to speak to what Barbara was talking about all the social media and all the other platforms that we have available that don't cost us money, would be rather to, instead of first, shooting out a newsletter, let's try to capitalize as much as we can on those platforms. It's easier to send out whether postcards or just have other marketing in place throughout the cities that highlight those social media platforms, like a QR code or whatnot that links them to there. I know that it's there's going to be obviously a percentage of people that don't have social media or aren't on Nextdoor or whatnot, but at least if we can capitalize on those platforms that don't cost us much in a easy way, would at least get us, a more global, engagement with the community. So I think if we try to do that first before we, shoot out a newsletter, I think that would at least get us some more exposure. So then we can have a better idea of what information we can put out there, what they want to see, what's being, what they're being receptive to from the beginning. So that's just my thoughts on that comment that you said, because, we do have those platforms available. But again, yes, you have to have followers and people who are looking. And I mean, there are ways in the community we can do that too. We just had street fairs at almost every town over the last few weeks. That would have been a great opportunity. But then moving forward, there might be some coming in the fall, but we'll have other opportunities to have a booth or whatnot, so we can share more information. I think it's a little, I guess because I'm in Escondido and we don't have it yet, it might be a little too early for us to start to address the new towns that are coming in on board. But those are just my ideas.
Thanks, Susan. Good thoughts. Paige, then Deborah, then Rick.
Yeah, so I assumed, since we were talking about electronic newsletter, Barb, that we would only have access to our customers, right? But In Carlsbad, when we were lobbying for community choice energy, our Sierra Club team just set up tables in front of the libraries and educated our residents that way. So I like Susan's idea, like street fairs and whatnot. I'm happy to, staff a table, and can we just get people to sign up? I know the website has a contact form on there. Presumably we could use that, something similar to sign up people that aren't current customers and get them kind of enrolled in the newsletter that way. So anyway, that's my thought.
Thank you, Paige. Deborah.
Well, I guess, I'm all for any digital content, because the paper costs and mailing, and I'm sure a lot of that goes in the trash. I understand that. So I think that's the right approach. So I guess if we are really focusing on information to our customers, that's a very different, in my opinion, conversation than our recruitment efforts for our new cities as they come on board. So maybe that's just something that needs to be slid over. But the other question I had, if you're on social media, every post needs to have 100 hashtags that have every single thing to do with climate. You're just looking for somebody to forward that and keep putting that out there, and it lands on, other people's feeds, or, doing the app where you're connecting to different accounts and stuff. So I think there's ways to build that. I mean, that's how most people build it. I don't know, are we on LinkedIn? I mean, there's just so many ways that we could do the digital formatting and just put a bit.ly where people can, link into the newsletter, and remove the financial cost of the printing. But again, not everybody is doing that. And there are probably one part of our population that might be interested in being part of this, might be our elder, those that are over a certain age, and they may not be active on social media. So I think all of those need to come into the decision tree when you talk about a newsletter or any kind of information going out.
Thank you, Deborah. Rick.
Yeah, thank you. So when we talk about who the audience is, I think equally as important is, what do we want the audience to do with this information? We're gonna spend money to create this, but what do we want our target audience? How do we want them to respond? I have to think about the newsletters that I receive, and the people here, on this meeting, we're super interested and very involved, and we're going to read this. But our average customer is not going to be interested. So what kind of newsletters do I receive, and do I get any value for them, right? And so if I drive a Mini, if the Mini guys send me a newsletter every month, well, I'm already a customer. I'm not going to buy another Mini, next month. If I'm an electric customer, I'm already the customer. So I think the target audience is really critical, because I think one of the great things to talk about is, what are we going to do to help meet the greenhouse gas plans in our individual communities? But who's the target for that information, and what do we want them to do with that information? I think before we come up with the content, we really need to understand.
Thank you, Rick. I saw somebody else's hand up, but it looks like it might have gone back down. Was there somebody else that wanted to make a comment? Jennifer.
That was a great point, Rick. I appreciate you bringing that up. Like, what is the point of what we would be doing, and would it be worth? But my comment, and the reason I took my hand down, was just related. It was just really minor. It's related to the idea of doing a hard copy newsletter. And I just had a question as far as how the billing works. Like, how are the bills sent to customers? Do they initially get a hard copy and then they have to opt out to only do digital, or does it only go digital and then they get a hard copy if they want to?
Great question. So we don't actually, our charges appear on the SDG&E bill. So nothing changes with regards to billing, except the section of the bill that's generation that SDG&E is providing. That's replaced. Actually, that stays, and SDG&E backs out their charge, and then our charge is on the bottom of the SDG&E bill. So the customer still receives just one electric bill that they pay, and then SDG&E collects the payment, allocates our portion, and sends it to us daily.
So SDG&E, the way their statements work, right, is that you can opt out of getting the hard copy. And I mean, that's like what I do for my bill is I just get the electronic copy. But there might be some customers that like getting a hard copy. And those would be the ones where it might be worth saying like, okay, if you get a hard copy of your statement, that maybe the newsletter goes in with that, with the statement. I'm just thinking of EDCO. So I, for some reason, still get a hard copy of my statement from EDCO and have a really great newsletter. Like every month they send a newsletter home. And of course, like you were saying, Rick, I'm a type of person that will read that newsletter. So not everybody does, but I appreciate getting a hard copy because there's graphics on it and there's a lot of information. So I think that there is maybe a portion of the population that is, if they do already prefer getting a hard copy of their bills in the mail, that maybe they would pick up a newsletter and read it.
Good point. Deborah, back to you.
Oh, my question just on your point is our relationship with SDG&E so good that we could put an insert in their billing, or we could, have a line with a link to a newsletter? Or, I mean, I just don't know how that works. Would that even be a possibility?
I do believe we can have an insert. It's not free, but what we do have the ability to do is put, we do have a portion of the page of the bill that our charges are on where we can put a notice on there. So we can certainly put on there, to access for a current copy of our newsletter, go to our website here. So that's certainly something we can do. We can have it, print on the bill, every time, just like we have our, for questions, call this phone number, which is our call center phone number. One thought that I did have is I believe all of the cities still send out a quarterly recreation brochure, and in those brochures are articles, written by the city. And that may be a venue for us to, seek out pages in that brochure, because I would guess that there's a good number of community members that go through that brochure and it just doesn't get tossed out. And for, a little, they may charge us a little bit, but it would be much cheaper than us mailing out on our own. And that may be something. Quarterly might be, just the right amount of time, and we might be able to get something out.
I love that idea.
Yeah, let me offer a couple of random ideas, and then with your permission, let's move on. I want to get to the subcommittees and let you all go home by 4 o'clock if we can. One, a newsletter, as with social media or any other outreach, is only as good as the content. And to do a good job, it's a lot of work. If any of you have ever put together a newsletter, it can be valuable if we have the content to brag about, to be blunt. When we start having success stories, that's good content. When we can start helping people understand how they can opt in for solar and get going with that, that's good content. I think quarterly, if we were going to do a newsletter, is about as frequently as we could do it without having to sort of struggle for content. And my own feeling is at this point, I think we want to fashion a campaign to increase our outreach, but I'm not convinced that we should put a lot of effort into a newsletter if it might be better put into a social media campaign, or even just an e-blast campaign. We could have a program where you could opt in on the website to get on our email list. And when something happens of note, we can send blanket emails out. If we build some credibility that those are worth reading, we're not wasting people's time, those can be perhaps easier and more effective. Last round of thoughts, and then let's go to subcommittees. And Barbara, with your, let's bring this topic back. I don't think we're done with it. At
I
this
just had
point.
one comment on what you said. Do you know if all of our cities are doing e-blast? Could we be part of that?
I don't know if we're all doing them, and there are a lot of rules about cities and cities doing newsletters, but yeah, I think most of the cities mail utility bills of some sort that we could do envelope stuffers in. Might even be easier than dealing with SDG&E, I don't know. And there are lots of things that are going on in the cities already that we could pile on. and ask for maybe a column or a paragraph in the Chamber of Commerce newsletter or the Sierra Club newsletter or whatever, rather than trying to do an entire one on our own. But so I go ahead.
To your point of bringing it back, maybe when we come back to it, if everyone can think about what are the groups that are currently communicating with our customers that we might reach out to and ask if we can put even information that says, that promotes our social media and where to get information and get that process going. Because we really want to, encourage growth on our platforms. And so that's probably, an audience we're missing out on reaching out to. And so if you could.
That's a great suggestion. Let me ask everybody on this advisory committee, give some thought and try to come in with a list in your community. What organizations and entities would be a good for us to outreach to? And then we can develop some talking points, or we can ask the Pepe Smith folks to help us with that, to target those existing organizations to try to get on their radar. That would be productive. And we can have further discussion about this whole topic. I think, because I think we'd all like to get to the point where we feel good that we have a recommendation to pass up to the board as to what to do on this, but I don't think we're there yet. All right, so let's move to subcommittees, because I do want to get those going so that we can do some work in between our quarterly meetings. And Barbara, did you want to introduce the topic for us?
Yeah, I have a similar slide, so I won't jump over and share. But this is a topic idea that came up at our last meeting that the Chair Warden, I think you raised the question of, let's discuss now that we have, a number of committee members, and it's a bit easier to set up subcommittees, is to talk about, do we want to have subcommittees? If so, answer questions such, what should the term length of those subcommittees be? What topic areas? What's the priority? And what would be the goals of those subcommittees? So I'll turn it over to you to
all right, let's see, does anybody have a thought right away? If not, I can share mine to get the discussion going. And that is, it's really difficult for us to have meaningful input to our board when we only meet quarterly. And once we start building reserves in the budget as an organization, there are going to be really important questions about what are we going to do with those funds? What programs do we want to champion and support in our communities? Community solar or electric vehicle charging stations or whatever. And so I think it would be good if we could get ahead of that discussion a bit by some subcommittees to talk amongst themselves, less than a quorum, and come back to the full committee with their recommendations on some of these topics. And the topics that make sense to me would be the one we're just talking about, an outreach program. We could have a subcommittee that could work between now and the next full committee meeting to talk about newsletters and e-blasts and various outreach strategies. Another topic would be on programs to support in our local communities. EV stations, for example, that could be a subcommittee of itself. To look at home solar and NEM issues, that could be a subcommittee in itself. And there are probably other topics. And, the beauty of subcommittees are you can meet informally. You can meet at the local coffee shop. You don't have to notice anybody, and you just go and you talk and you work. You can meet weekly. You can meet every other week, whatever works. So what are other people's thoughts? Rick.
Yeah, so I joined this because I want to work with local programs. So if we have a subcommittee for that, I really would like to be on.
Did you say local programs?
Yes.
Okay, there we have subcommittee number one in the formation with local programs. Who would like to serve with Rick on that? Anybody? Susan, you're a volunteer? All right, anybody else? Deborah, your hand is up. I'm not sure you have a question or you want to volunteer or both.
No, I see Paige with a real hand up. I'm waiting to talk, but I think Paige is ready to volunteer.
Okay. I'm sorry, Paige, are you volunteering for our local programs committee? All right, that's 3. We could have a couple of more. You don't have to jump on now if you don't want to, and we can add people later, but that's enough critical mass. And I think let's just designate, Rick, you're the chair, at least for the first meeting, to reach out to the other two and organize your first meeting, and it's up to the three of you to take it from there. And if there are more of you that want to join that subcommittee later, you're welcome to do so. Paige.
Hey, I just want to remind Barb, right now we have no way to communicate because we don't have emails, so that's still not available.
Okay, then let's, Rick, if you don't mind, contact Barbara and she will help you figure out how to communicate with your other subcommittee members. Deborah, you have a hand up.
Well, I think when we first started, we were talking about our underserved communities and how we were going to get them
Yes, we
involved in our city climate action goals. So I don't know if that falls under outreach, but certainly I think it's time, especially as we move into some of our larger communities, you know, that we really address that. And so I don't know what that would be called, sort of under outreach, but I really think it's, you know, it has a lot of, it's beyond the newsletter idea.
All right, I'm hearing that as a recommendation for a subcommittee to look at outreach to underserved communities. Deborah, you're willing to be on that? I would volunteer to, well, I'll volunteer to help as the chair on any of these subcommittees that you want to invite me to.
Can I just comment that I think some of the local programs would be under disadvantaged communities as well. So you've got
local programs would be arguably everything. So I think let's pull this issue out, serving under advantaged or disadvantaged communities, and have a separate subcommittee on that because that's its own bigger topic, I think.
Okay, that was what I was thinking of in terms of.
So we have Deborah is on this committee. Page, did you want to work on that one too?
Yeah, well, that was more what I was thinking of in terms of programs. Susan looks like she was maybe too. I don't know.
All right, Susan, you're smiling. You look like you want to volunteer.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, I would. But I was also going to comment that I think, you know, as we have our first meetings, we can also lay out, you know, what the parameters of the committee will be, and then come back in our next meeting so that we can at least have clear, you know, a lot more clearer definitions of what each subcommittee's like objectives and goals are. You know,
great idea.
I'm imagining we're not going to have time today to get to that.
Great idea. Let's ask each of these subcommittees come back next time with a draft mission statement. It doesn't have to be an epistle, but half a page or a page of what you see that you want to do. So we have two subcommittees so far, one program activity, local program activities, and one for outreach to disadvantaged communities. And I have Deborah and Susan and Paige on the disadvantaged outreach one. Kevin, I see you have a hand up. But you're muted, Kevin, if you want to say something. There you go. I see you're unmuted, Kevin, but I still can't hear you if you're talking.
You met a while ago.
Keep trying. I heard you for a moment there. So if you can hear me, Kevin, I think your connection is weak. I'm not sure why, but. All right, you keep trying, Kevin, and just interrupt us when you get on, but at the moment we can't really hear you. There, we could see you. That's a step in the right direction. Try again, Kevin. Can you?
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. You mentioned a little while ago about EV charging. What were you thinking as far as that?
I was just thinking that the whole world of success of electric vehicles, which is key to meeting our climate goals, is highly dependent upon having adequate EV stations. And I think in all of our climate action plans, it talks about that. But there's a lot of ground that could be plowed by this committee to look into the climate action plans and start saying, okay, here's what we think San Marcos could do, or Carlsbad or Escondido, and go from there.
Right. So that's kind of why I can you hear? That's why I was on the climate action plan working group. Jennifer's on that as well for San Marcos.
All right, Kevin, I'm taking that as a volunteer. You're now the chair of the EV subcommittee, unless you tell me you don't want to. And Jennifer, are you willing?
No, I will.
Jennifer, can we count you in on that one?
Sure, yes.
Okay, anybody else that wants to work on EVs? Deborah, your hand's up.
Oh, I just have another comment. So I'm
Okay, go ahead with your comment. We'll see if
well, and
anybody.
it's just a question. One of the, I think, parts of our sort of charge is that sort of larger picture of outreach. And I know, Dwight, when we were talking earlier, you said, well, they obviously didn't self-select in, so they're not our customers. And at some point for each one of our cities to really meet our climate act, we're going to have to get even a broader reach. So maybe not this year, but I do think that there is some reason and cause for us to really think about how do we engage the not engaged, like the opt-out people. Maybe not right now because we're still bringing on cities, but ultimately, if we really want to, we have to find a way to engage those communities. So, and then not just the underserved, but just, those that didn't want us to make that decision for them, that piece. So I don't know if that would be something appropriate for the first round of committees, but certainly something that is, I'm thinking about all the time about how do we get those that opted out back in
Yeah, I think that's a totally legitimate issue for a subcommittee, and I would phrase it more as customer encouragement and retention. We want to convince people not to opt out, and if they're already in, we want to encourage them to opt up to the 100% green, and we want to make sure they're happy and that they stay in. But so we are going to run out of time pretty soon, but so far I think we've made some good progress. We got 3 subcommittees, local projects, disadvantaged outreach, and EV charging, and asking each of you to meet between now and our next quarterly meeting and come back with a half-page or a page mission statement, what you want to accomplish. And if you want to go farther than that, you're welcome to it. And I think Deborah's suggestion about a customer committee, let's talk about that more at the next meeting and set one up if we're comfortable with it. And I think that's about enough for today. Deborah, you had something else?
I just wanted to say, so Susan, are you gonna, Barbara, are you going to be providing us sort of a who's on who and who's on first base kind of thing of this conversation?
Yeah, I hope you got notes, Barbara.
People know who to contact. Okay.
So I wanted to run through my notes because I was trying to take notes, and Susan can help me. And I also wanted to give an update on the status of emails. So, but first let's go through the subcommittee. So this is what I have. I have local programs. Rick Paul is leading that. I won't call him a chair, but I'll say lead. And Paige and Susan are the members of that subcommittee. Outreach to underserved communities. I have Deborah, Jade, Susan, and Paige. And Chair Warden, were you on that one as well?
I would be, yes. Please put me on that one. And for the other subcommittees, if I can help, I would attend all of the meetings if you want me to.
Okay. And then the EV subcommittee, I have Kevin as lead and Jennifer. And then what thought is, do we want to add a standing item on the agenda as a report out from the subcommittees just to share with the group?
Yes, definitely, we do.
Okay, we'll add that as an ongoing item at the top of the agenda. And we meet every other month, not quarterly, Chair.
I'm sorry. Thank you for that correction.
So
That's good news.
Yes, our next meeting is August the 4th. And our topic for that meeting will be marketing and outreach strategy. We're going to start talking about the lessons learned from the May 2021 launch that we can then improve upon our outreach and marketing for Escondido and San Marcos. Ideas for addressing misinformation and minimizing opt-outs. Identifying key stakeholder groups for outreach. So tying along with, what are those groups that are communicating with the communities that we might be able to tag along with, who should we be starting to, schedule time to meet with. And that this could maybe kind of trickle out of a subcommittee and maybe be a subcommittee, but putting together groups that, we can go along and talk to our key stakeholders in the communities. We're also going to provide an update on the website update. So we spent considerable time a few months back going through our website, and we've been making progress and we'll have our Trepepi Smith team go through the website and show you what has come of that. Also, our Trepepi Smith team is have set up the emails for the board, our committee members. So I know that some committee members, may not necessarily want the Clean Energy Alliance email address, but the purpose of it is to have it on the website, and it'll be set up to forward to wherever you want. So you're not having to monitor a separate email address, but you have an official email address that is on the website, and then it gets forwarded to you at email of your choice. And so be looking to hear from Allison Nichols of Trepepi Smith. She's going to be reaching out to you to find out where you would like those emails to be forwarded to.
Great. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thanks to everybody for attending today. I'm excited. I feel like we're finally going to get out of the starting blocks and doing some substantive work through subcommittees and at the committee level, and that'll be really great. And hopefully we'll have some new members soon. We have a couple of vacancies that will start the wheels in motion to fill those. If you know of anybody that you think from Del Mar and Solana Beach are the two empty seats that you think would be good, pass their names along.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you on August the 4th.